Hello everyone, and this lecture is on mass culture. It's a part of your paper on media, culture and society. In this lecture, you will learn about mass culture and various other forms of culture. You will also learn how mass culture is produced within a society and how it is different from other subcultures. Now, before discussing mass culture, let's understand what is meant by mass as well as culture. The concept of mass in social science as well as in media and communication studies depicts a society, the members of which are associated with each other through communication despite being scattered over a large geographical area. On the other hand, culture reflects a set of codes, values, attitudes, behaviors, living styles, and so on that bind people together consciously or subconsciously. Edward Teller in 1871 used the term culture in his study of the primitive culture to mean some qualities which members of a society acquire. For Teller, these qualities comprise of a complex whole of knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, customs, or other capabilities. Mass culture therefore means popularization of the culture among the masses. It refers to the creation and calculation of culture through mass media among the masses. Now the question is, can the terms mass culture and popular culture be used interchangeably? Let us try to answer this question. While some scholars characterize popular culture through its popularity based on quantitative analysis, but Lawrence Levine, a famous historian, defines popular culture as culture that is popular, culture that is widely accessible and widely accessed, widely disseminated, and widely viewed and heard or read. Popular culture is recognized through mass culture. There is yet another form of culture called high culture. High culture was used by aristocrats to publicize their class among the neo-elites. This is opposed to the low culture, or what is also called the mass culture or popular culture, having mass appeal among the non-elites. Cultural theorists often consider high and low cultures as the subcultures. Low culture, popular culture, and mass culture, being used synonymously, represent a form of culture that has a larger appeal in society and hence most often being termed as mass culture. Therefore, the term mass doesn't signify a quantitative section of society, but mass refers to the culturally deprived section of society. In simple words, mass culture, or what some call it as a popular culture, is the culture of the lower classes as opposed to the high culture, which represents the culture of the elite class. Now let's discuss the nature of this mass culture. The growth of mass culture can be traced since 18th century. This period saw the dominance of culture by the traditional upper class, which was broken down due to education. The acquiring of education by the masses and the Industrial Revolution vis-a-vis the advancements of technology, along with the modern technological advancements, all resulted in cheap production of commodities such as pictures, films, television, etc. This resulted in mass production and mass distribution of the productions. However, this period also witnessed a struggle between various classes of people over the allocation of resources. Power too was counted not only on political grounds but also on cultural lines also. This period saw the decline of high culture because of its use by the elite class to dominate the non-elites through the imposition of elite ideology, which was not acceptable to the non-elites. In support of this, Hague argued that the trouble with mass culture is that in various direct and indirect ways, it tends to make the existence of high culture impossible. This means that the growth of mass culture is a threat to the existing high culture of elites. However, it is argued that mass culture denoted the extension of traditional folk art prevalent among the common masses, which were produced by them not only to meet their own standards, but getting benefited from the high culture. Rationally, the struggle among the advocates of mass culture and high culture is actually a misleading one, while the supporters of high culture are actually against the mass culture, which they believe is harmful for the people consuming it in particular and for the society in general. The advocates of mass culture, overlooking the critic, continue to support mass culture sellers, thus rejecting the high culture. Therefore, there is no bridge between the two conflicting terms of culture, mass culture and high culture. While high culture can be the cause of cultural diversity and pluralism per se, as well as the breakdown of common society, but mass culture is represented by media not to satisfy but to exploit people's cultural needs. Now, let us analyze mass culture. Analyzing mass culture is a threefold process. It involves objects, procedures, and consumers. The first is objects, which involves cultural objects produced by the industry. Mass cultural objects can be anything, such as program on television or even the books. These objects, according to Marx analysis of capitalism, are commodities rather than outcome of the labor power of laborers utilized for its manufacture. One of the distinctive characteristics of mass cultural objects is the way they are produced and distributed through mass marketing industries. The usage of the produced objects results in the creation of culture by the consumers. Sociologists argue that this aspect of mass culture dynamics is very much neglected in its analysis. Consumers modify the objects which they use in a way that these objects, after modification, reflect certain cultural symbols which they use in certain community or group practices. Willener calls this process of massification of the objects as the process of personalization. The second tradition is concerned with the producers of objects. Objects are produced by the producers for exchange of value, which as consumers of these objects consume for their own value. Exchange value and use value are interconnected through sign value, which is applied through advertising and control of the market to complicate the consumer's calculating consciousness. This indicates that there is no mechanical domination of the consumer behavior. Instead, it reflects a sort of relationship between the producer and the user, which is placed on the consumer behavior. Manipulation of the calculating capacities of consumers by the producers in order to sell their objects involves a process called transfunctionalization. Transfunctionalization, which is a feature of hegemony, involves producing as well as controlling ideological meanings. This ensures secure and stable user markets. The third tradition is concerned with those who consume these objects, that is, the consumers or users of the objects. This tradition expands our understanding of the mass media industries involved in the marketing of mass cultural objects through using them. In this tradition, consumers of the objects transfunctionalize use values into sign values through consumer-object relations. Through this relationship, the consumers produce meanings out of the purchased objects through modification, as mentioned earlier. This relationship between object, producer and consumer, which is central to mass culture, contains three different processes: meanings, production and transfunctionalization. Such a deconstructionist mode of analyzing mass culture involves an understanding of the production and distribution of objects, as well as the symbiotic analysis of the objects by both producers as well as consumers, which correspond to these three traditions that we just discussed. Two important schools of thought concerning mass culture include the Frankfurt School and the Cultural Studies School. Now, let's discuss about the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School got its name from a prominent institute in Germany, the Frankfurt Institute for Social Research, established in 1923. The founders of the school belonged to the upper and middle class of the German Jewish left-wing society. The prominent intellectuals of the schools include Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Herbert Marcuse. The theory that they postulated, called as the critical theory, had highly influenced the study of mass media and mass culture, a process which they call social cement, which involves two aspects: the capitalization of mass media and the media determinism. The Frankfurt School introduced the term culture industries to mean industrialization of mass culture and its commercialization. Its proponents found that within these cultures, industries, mass media, commercialization are at par with other natural commodities, because both the mass media commodities as well as natural commodities make profit for the capitalists. This indicated the dependency of mass media on the capital. But Kellner argues that the commodities of the mass media produced in the culture industries provide ideological legitimation of the capitalist societies. It also serves the function of integrating people within the structure of mass culture in society. This reflects the dominance of mass media over mass culture in societies. Frankfurt School thoroughly expressed this dominance of mass media through mass determinism. The idea of mass determinism through technology brings about an overall change in society, according to radical theorists. For example, Marshall McLuhan, in his famous work, The Gutenberg Galaxy, tries to expose the role of communication technology in driving social change. For McLuhan, it is the media technology rather than the media contents that play a dominant role in mass culture. Adorno and Horkheimer suggest that the mass production of low-quality culture by the mass media are replaced by the high culture and traditional folk culture. On consumption of these low-quality cultures by the audiences, they tend to behave like and therefore become mass audiences. This means that mass culture serves the functions of ideology. The ideology carries two traits with it: fraudulence and manipulativeness. Fraudulence means undetectable clemency and cruelty in the ideology shrouded by mass culture. Such fraudulence in ideology is also delicately imposed upon the masses audiences, that they do not feel being deceived. This creates a strong sense of belief among them about what the ideology promotes. On the other hand, manipulativeness means imposition of the existing political, social and economic orders. Manipulativeness involves occupying the leisure time of media audiences which they otherwise would use in their understanding and the realization of the exploitation by the elites. Due to this manipulativeness, the power of mass audiences to resist the economic and political order got restricted. This lessened their ability to think critically about the system. Therefore, according to Frankfurt School, mass culture serves the function of developing and preserving the capitalist system. Now let us talk about the British Cultural Studies School. The Cultural Studies School is closely associated with Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies at the Birmingham University in UK. The Cultural Studies School was founded in Britain after the Second World War in 1964 for the expansion of cultural studies. The chief proponents of the school include Richard Hogarth, Stuart Hall and Richard Johnson. During the early 1980s, these scholars significantly contributed towards the development of cultural studies in Britain and then expanded to the United States and other countries. The Cultural Studies School accepted different forms of cultural products required by the mass audiences than those fundamentally or the fraudulently imposed on them like the Frankfurt School implemented them. The Cultural Studies School embraced the prevailing differences in the media content between popular or mass culture and high culture. However, they didn't accept the aesthetic value of mass culture as being inferior to the high culture of elites. This could mean that the Cultural Studies School rejects hierarchical order of subcultures. They argue that culture reflects a particular lifestyle, a way of living. Therefore, the followers of the schools of thought showed too much of interest towards the role that mass audiences play in mass cultural communication. Their claim lies mainly in the fact that mass culture, though not produced by the masses but among the masses, must be actively and selectively consumed by mass audiences. Mass culture, they believed, is the result of interaction between mass audiences and mass media. The active and selective consumption of the cultural objects involves in what Stuart Hall developed the encoding-decoding model of mass media. The encoder and decoder in this model mean the producer and the reader respectively. This model helps the audiences to decode the meanings of the objects as per their uses. This means that mass audiences will only select and accept the cultural objects that they find fit them as per their personal background. Therefore, this model holds that the meanings to the mass media objects are not transmitted through encoding but produced through decoding by the readers. Hall's reception theory, which involves textual analysis, allows for dominant hegemonic analysis of cultural objects. Dominant hegemonic model balances the two meanings attached to the cultural objects by the producer and the reader through encoding-decoding process. The process is applied to see whether the meanings attached to the cultural objects through decoding by the audiences are similar to the meanings attached through encoding by the producer. Stuart Hall's encoding-decoding model accorded significant rights to the audiences in their selection of the mass media, in the process of decoding the media objects and in the production of mass culture. This allowed for the abolition of cultural hegemony, which further resulted in the transition of masses from passive followers to both the consumers and producers of mass culture. In short, both the Frankfurt School and the Cultural Studies School, despite their significant contributions, differed in their critiques of the masses, mass culture, mass media, and mass audience. Therefore, while the cultural studies school shows concern with how masses engage with the mass media objects, the Frankfurt School, on the other hand, deals with how mass media influences the mass audiences. Friends, therefore, we are concluding this part. Therefore, in this lecture, we have discussed mass culture and the allied terms such as high culture, popular culture, low culture, and so on, and try to bring out differences and similarities within these different forms of culture. This lecture should enlighten you with the nature of mass culture, and this tries to find a divide between mass culture and high culture. We discussed that while analyzing mass culture, threefold process is used to analyze different traditions of mass culture involving objects, producers of the objects, and the consumers or users of the object. We also discussed the two schools of thought, the Frankfurt School and the Cultural Studies School, that have significantly contributed towards the understanding of mass culture in relation to production, distribution, and consumption objects. Therefore, at the end of this lecture, you should have a better idea of the concept of mass culture and the various theories that surround it. For more details, please read the modules carefully and also attempt the questions given at the end of this module. Thank you very much.